Everyone. In this video, I will be attempting to explain why it's absolutely necessary that there be a Trinitarian God and not just a God that has one person. Um, Now, a lot of the things that I'm covering in this video, I already talked about in my first video, so if you just want to watch that to get the full scope, I highly suggest you start off by watching that. But also, I feel that not a lot of people wanted to spend all of that time watching that one video, so and I think this is one of the most important points of that entire video. Um, so I think I should, or I thought I should make it its own video. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. Well, first we need the background knowledge, of course. We need to know, what the three persons of the Trinity do under the revelation that I received. And so let's start with the Father. The Father gives form to ideas. That's not the only thing he does, and this isn't the only thing that the three persons of the Trinity do. It's just an additional thing that is the most crucial for understanding this video. So, God the Father gives physical form to ideas, and then Jesus is the intelligible realm. So this is one of the main claims I make in my first video, and what that means. And it's not the intelligible realm that it's not the same intelligible realm that Plato talks about in his Realm of Forms in his work The Republic. It's actually more so in a meta intelligible realm where all possible ideas exist in the intelligible realm. So Plato believed only perfect things existed in the intelligible realm, but under my belief, I believe all possible ideas exist in the meta intelligible realm, which in my theology is the body of Jesus. So, and then the Holy Spirit is the selector. It selects the ideas that most glorify God. So in creation, what you have is you have the body of Jesus. You have the Holy Spirit hovering above the body of Jesus, drawing up ideas. And this image plays out in Genesis as the Spirit was hovering over the formless waters, right? So you have the Spirit, right, hovering over the intelligible realm, drawing up all ideas that glorify God the most. And then God the Father gave form to all of those ideas, like a physical form. Okay, so now I'll explain why three persons in a Trinity, or why three persons in God is necessary for creation. Why it's necessary that there be a Trinitarian God. So if we have only God the Father, which means only one person who can, give form, and that's all he can do. Well, if that's the only thing that exists, he won't have the ideas, right, to give form to. If that's his main role, right? So like and this is why it's necessary that Jesus is the intelligible realm, or why it's necessary that the intelligible realm exists, because in order to, create and like create anything really, he had to have the idea of like what to create, if that makes sense. So in the beginning it says he created the heavens and the earth, right? And he had to start off with the idea of those two, right? He didn't just say, oh, I'm gonna, create whatever I want and then spontaneously heavens and the earth just appear. That's not how it works, because that'd be like him casting a spell, right? Like it wouldn't make sense, because it would imply that he's creating within a pre-made framework. Or like, oh, if God just said like, I want to create you know well, let's imagine he didn't have the ideas at first, right? And he's like, oh, I want to create a world that glorifies me, right? And if you're excluding the Holy Spirit, and if you're excluding the intelligible realm, the issue is that he's like casting a spell, right? Like then that would imply he already exists inside of a framework, and that would suggest that there's, someone beyond him, because he's saying a command that's intelligible, right? But it shouldn't be intelligible, because there's nothing in place to make that happen yet, right? Um, so basically, the reason, well, we need the Father, of course, right? Because the Father is giving form to ideas, and we we necessarily know that the Father exists, or at least, something father-like exists, in the sense that something gives form to things that initially existed in the intelligible realm. Now that doesn't mean, you have the ideas all in place and then make it all have form. Like you can select the ideas initially, but you by necessity the ideas existed first. And that's because ideas of things are eternal, right? And um they're yeah, eternal, and then they're infinite in the sense that there's infinitely many ideas. But like you and I are an idea necessarily, like by definition, right? We're an idea, and the reason we know we're ideas is because we can think about one another, right? So but the thing is, what's different between, the idea of us and the idea of, things that don't exist, is that we have physical form, right? And so this is kind of what I covered in my first video, but on like a basic level, everything exists already because the ideas of everything already exist. But I guess what separates that from, you know, our reality is that these ideas have physical form. Um, right. So we need Jesus because Jesus is the idea, like he is the intelligible realm, and in the intelligible realm contains all ideas. So you have something that's giving form to all things, not to all things, giving form, right? You have God the Father who has the power to give form to all all ideas, any idea he wants. And then you have the ideas, right? So what exactly are the ideas and where do they exist? Well, I talk about this in my first video, and I already talked about it before, but the ideas are eternal and they're infinite because, well, one, you can't really kill an idea, right? Like, sure, you can, kill the person who has the idea, but, a million years later someone can have that exact same idea, and there's nothing you can do to stop that, right? And then in the other sense, they're infinite because, or this realm of ideas is infinite because there exists infinitely many ideas, right? And we know that's true because you can think of like infinitely many variations of, whatever thing. Like imagine yourself, right? There's infinitely many possible variations of you, and that's not just physical variations, right? That's like variations of status, variations of like, who you're connected with, like all these different things that define who you are. There's infinitely many variations of that, and that applies to every single person in the world, every single object, and then even things that don't exist, right? So like I guess you could talk about like a flying elephant, right? I mean, we've had that idea, and then we actually made it have form by, producing movies and stuff. But um, that idea, right, is something that doesn't exist in this world, and you can think of infinitely many, possible ideas, right? So um, and there's no limit to that, and we also know that's true because um, there's things like the Mandelbrot set, which is a mathematical expression that creates like infinite complexity, right? So even in mathematics, we know that there's possible infinities. Um, though no I'm pretty sure, as far as I know, no possible infinity has like an actual full complete manifestation in the real world. So setting that aside, right? We know the intelligible realm is infinite, and we know it's eternal, and the only thing that's infinite and eternal is God. This is again what I talked about in my first video, and I explain actually why he is the intelligible realm, like the biblical backing for that. But for the purposes of this video, what you need to know is that we'll just call this intelligible realm Jesus, right? And I'm not saying like the point of this video is not to make the claim that Jesus is the intelligible realm. More so, what I'm saying is, well, like the title of this video suggests, there's a logical necessity for there to be three persons in the one Godhead, right? So why it's necessary that there exists a Trinity. So we have God the Father who gives form to all possible, or any possible idea, or whatever he pleases. And then you have the intelligible realm, which is all possible ideas. And by like logically, these two things have to exist, right? And like you can call them whatever you want. Like you don't have to necessarily call the intelligible realm Jesus. I'm just explaining why these three things by nature are God, right? Well, and I'm getting to the third thing, but and the third thing is there's a selector, right? There's a selection taking place, and that's the Holy Spirit in Christian doctrine. And the reason we know a selector exists is because not all possible ideas were given form, right? So, um, and the reason we know this is the case is because there's things like universal constants and mathematical expressions that if others were given form, there would be contradictions, and we wouldn't be able to like understand the universe. So imagine the Holy Spirit selected the idea of like Euler's number, right? Or that constant, or like pi for, our universe, right? If the Holy Spirit had selected a different number, and that's not even that could go we could think about other physical constants, like maybe like the mass of an electron, right? Like had the Holy Spirit selected a different mass or a different constant for, whatever you want, then we wouldn't be able to understand our universe, because you look there it's this, and you look there it's that, and you look over there it's a completely different thing, right? But we know that in our universe, I mean, unless you're like, under extreme conditions, we know like these things don't really change, right? Like they're, and this kind of ties into the fine tuning argument for God's existence. Um, and that's basically like our universe is so perfect, so there must be a divine creator, right? So basically it definitely does tie into that, right? And it's the belief that, okay, well, not all possible ideas were given form, because if all possible ideas were given form, then there'd be contradictions. So we know there had to be a selection, right? Some ideas were selected, some weren't. The ones that were selected were given form by God the Father, and the ones that weren't selected weren't given a physical form. But they still exist as an idea, right? Because we can consider, like, we can be like, oh well, what if pi equaled 4 or 3, right? Like we can think about it, but that doesn't mean it's going to have a physical form in our world, right? So those are in summary the three persons of the Trinity. Now the reason they're all necessary is because, right, you have something that's giving form to those ideas, and then you have the ideas in the first place, and you have the selector, and that's the one that selects the ideas, right? Because we know that, obviously, as I just explained, not all ideas were selected. There was a discriminant selection of what ideas get to have form and what ideas don't get to have form. So um now, like, the logical reasoning behind it, like, if you can start with any of the three persons of the Trinity, and I think by necessity these three persons have to exist, because this specific, like, and I don't want to get it confused, like, or I don't want to confuse the audience, right? Like they're not by definition. It's up to your own beliefs to decide whether or not these actually are the three persons in the Christian Bible. All I'm trying to point out in this is, by necessity there needs to exist three persons in the one Godhead. Just like, that's, it must exist, it must be true, right? And like, well, what if people might point out, they're like, oh well, what if it's just God the Father who has the ideas and selects and gives form to all things? But then I think that would just be a heresy of monism, or like monoism, where you put everything as one person when it actually is three distinct persons, right? Because, well, we as Christians, we do believe that the three persons of the Trinity also have the same powers as the other two persons of the Trinity. Or each person of the Trinity has the same powers as the other two persons of the Trinity, and that's actually reflected throughout the Bible, right? Like, you have Jesus, who's able to give form to ideas, right? So like when he takes water and turns it to wine, right? That's a direct action that God the Father would take, right? Being able to literally, give form to an idea, right? Give form to the idea that the vase actually contains wine instead of water. So in Christianity, we do believe that all three persons of the Trinity are able to, um, do the same things that the other persons of the Trinity do, or the other three persons of the Trinity do, but their main focus, right? Their main role is, as I outlined before, is the God the Father who gives form to gives form to ideas. The Jesus who is all ideas, and then the Spirit which selects the ideas that most glorify God. And that's actually something important to clarify because um, there are different spirits that exist. Like you have, the more well known, the spirit of the devil, right? The spirit of the devil selects ideas that lead to death. So, and then on a personal level, right? Like we each, have we can choose to listen to spirits, right? Like if we choose to listen to the devil, then the devil will select actions, or it'll select ideas for us that will end up leading towards our death, right, through sin. And then you have the Holy Spirit who selects actions and ideas for us to make manifest in the world that lead to God's glorification and ultimately the best possible life we can live, which I talk about again in the first video, so I highly suggest you watch that. But as as I was saying, right, we need the reason. So we have all these different spirits, but you have the one Holy Spirit, right? And we know it's selecting in the image of God, or at least that's something that we have to trust. That's a leap of faith, right? That everything comes together in the end. Like this reality is the reality that glorifies God the most, no matter what happens in it, which is a crazy claim to make, but it might, it's definitely something that's keeps you moving forward in life, even if bad things might happen. So as I was saying, um, so we have again the three persons of the Trinity: God the Father, which gives form to all possible ideas. You have Jesus, who is all possible ideas, and then the Spirit, who selects the ideas that most glorify God. Now, the main reason we know that there must be a Trinity or a Trinitarian God is because all other theories around creation aren't sufficient enough to explain our reality. So if you let's I guess start with the atheist route, right? And it's well, there's there's different arguments, but some of the main ones are obviously it's like it happened randomly, right? It just spontaneously everything was given form. Now, I mean that's definitely what the Christians would argue because we say God the Father, spontaneously gave form to all ideas in creation, but their claim is more so it was like mechanistic things like quantum fluctuations, and then poof. And then also now they there's an argument, right? The first mover argument, and that's the Christians will often ask like, okay, well then what caused this, and then what caused this, and then what caused this, right? So you have like the Big Bang, right? It's like, well, what caused the Big Bang? Well, we don't know because we obviously can't see what happened before the Big Bang. But atheists would have to argue that, well, it just keeps on going back like infinitely. Like there's no first action, right? It just always was stuff. So um no, I think it's just I mean, as a finite being, right? Like it doesn't feel right because we know, or at least in our experience, every physical thing has a beginning, right? So now the way I'm going to tie this together is by talking about the intelligible realm. So the intelligible realm contains all possible ideas. And as I mentioned before, what that implies is that everything already exists to some extent in the intelligible realm. They're not to the extent that physical things do, because physical things actually have like a physical, tangible form. But you can still think of things, right? Like they still exist, but not on the same degree as physical things. So if everything already exists in the intelligible realm, and infinitely before creation, right? Because you could have a human a trillion years earlier, a trillion years before whatever the atheists want, and they can still think of whatever they would like to, right? There's no like really there's not really a limit to it, though. I mean, they probably wouldn't be able to think of a lot because a lot of your thoughts are based off of things that you've interacted with, but they'd still I mean, depending on what they've seen, they'd still be able to think of things like independent of how far away they are from this world. But now my point is okay. Well, everything already exists in in the intelligible realm to some extent, right? So why is it necessary? And this is a question to the atheists. Why is it necessary for these things, all these ideas, to have a physical form if everything already exists in the intelligible realm? Now, I think it probably would be better to have someone to debate about this, but because I don't really have an answer for that question, at least not for the atheists. But I think it's a really good point because everything already exists, and it's like the physical form of things is an addition to things already existing, right? It's something on top of it. So it's like how did we get from the intelligible realm to physical things, right? And that's the argument. Like, how do we start with nothing? Well, it's not necessarily nothing, right? But it's nothing in the sense of this physical world, because the ideas that don't have a tangible form are nothing, at least in our own observations. um so if like how do we get from the intelligible realm to a physical world, right? Like it doesn't make much sense. And well, that's again, that's what the Christians argue, is like, how do we, start from nothing to something? How do we go from nothing to something, right? And that's why we need God the Father to give form to those ideas, to turn it into something. Okay, so now what the atheist might claim is it just keeps on going back. It keeps on going back forever, and there was no beginning, right? There was never a stage where you have nothing and then you go into something. It's always been something and then nothing as well, because the intelligible realm exists on top of that. But I think the issue is again, it's like there still had to be a jump, right? Like, what do you mean it you had something and on top of the ideas of it that already existed, right? Like it doesn't, I guess it doesn't make logical sense, because if the ideas of everything already exists, if everything already exists, right, and everything existed infinitely, but not to the same degree, then how does it jump? How does it jump into a physical world? It just yeah, it doesn't make much sense, and I think it'd be better for me to debate someone on this. But so that's basically the atheist worldview, right? Like why there isn't a Trinitarian God, or why there isn't a God at all. Now, I think there's monoist worldviews where it's like, okay, we only have God the Father, and that'd be like Judaism, Islam, and then there's other worldviews, other religions. I'll see if I'll cover those, but I think it's like similar ideas, or similar ideas to the things I will address or have already addressed, but um, now, with monoistic worldviews, where it's only you have God the Father, right? Their claim is, well, I think a lot of it does fall under the monoistic heresy, which is just mistaking the three persons of the Trinity for just one person, right? Because we know, like, how would it be possible for like the intelligible realm to, I guess, give form to itself, right? Because that's what they would be implying. Though as Christians we believe, Jesus obviously has this power, but if you're excluding Christian belief, you're basically having, like, how could the realm of ideas give form to itself, like physical form to itself? Like I think it's very, very tricky logic that I'm trying to hash out, but um also under that, it's like, well, we know the intelligible realm exists, right? So if the monoists or the monoistics say it's God, the intelligible realm is God, then and they're combining all three into one. Again, it's committing the heresy of monoism, because, well, you have, of course, you have the intelligible realm, and then things that actually have physical forms. You had something that was necessary to make that jump between the intelligible realm and the physical world, and then you have to have the third person of the Trinity, which is the Holy Spirit, and that's only selecting some of the ideas to give physical form, because not all ideas were given physical form, right? So I think that worldview of the mono, like where it's just one person of the Trinity, just God the Father, I think the mistake there is where you're not identifying the other two persons of the Trinity. And it's not like they're additional, like no, it's just I think they've mistaken one person um or they've mistaken three persons for one. Right. Um and I think that's probably the main points I wanted to cover in this video. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and also um, maybe if anyone would like to join the show, I guess we could do like a video, and it'd probably be better just for me to have someone to talk to about my ideas, so that obviously there would be someone to shoot me down if I say something stupid, which I'm sure I have already said something very wrong, but I'm just gonna see how it goes. And thank you. Subscribe and like. All right, bye bye.